Hello and welcome to the SuperShow podcast. I am Alex Jones and today I am your host, and joining me is the absolutely fantastic Jamie. And we call him that because that's his name. Hello, Jamie.
I don't know what that makes you then, because you have just masterminded what might be the YouTube thumbnail of the century. I don't know if we need to do a descriptor for people at home who can't see it right now, but it's pretty special.
A descriptor. It is an Assassin's Creed picture with some little boxes and the word deals, 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 and 20% off and some other things, which makes sense in the context of the first story we're going to be talking about, which is Ubisoft sliding some cheeky adverts into their games. What might throw people is the very, very £1 fish that it says at the bottom of the thumb, which I had never heard of, and it was a viral thing that you told me about.
Yeah, but it's the worst kind of viral in that it was viral like 10 or 11 years ago, and no one really remembers it anymore, probably for good reason.
But we were trying to think of something that made sense with the thumbnail of what people say that's international. Let's put it that way. Because in the UK, if you want someone to buy something from like a market stall, if you were Ubisoft, for example, and you had a market stall, rather than putting pop-ups in your games, you would say something like, come on, two for a pound, two for a pound. That's what you would say. But Americans, Canadians, Australians, people from like the African continent, people from Europe, they wouldn't get that. And so you assured me that something more international, more widely known, was very, very £1 fish. So I thought
I was thinking
that would
actually,
work.
maybe we should have done a French version in honor of Yves Guillemot, of course, the legendary CEO of Ubisoft. Like what it would
What do the
be.
French say?
What's very 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 good would be très très bon, and very very cheap would be très très. I don't even know how to say cheap.
What's fish?
And then poisson, un euro poisson.
Très, très
There are probably
bon
some
poisson. Très, très bon. Un
un
euro
euro poisson.
poisson. Very,
That
very
actually rhymes
€1
as well.
fish. Oh, we missed the trick there, haven't we?
I know that there are actually some French-speaking people who listen to this and watch this as well, so they will be distinctly disappointed right now. Um, well, foremost amongst them, Yves Guillemot, who, of course, an avid listener, and he's just counting down the days till he can hear our first-hand remarks on Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora. He can't wait.
I am genuinely surprised that game comes out in like 8, 9 days.
Doesn't feel real, does it?
It doesn't feel real, and if you'd have asked me if that game was going to get delayed again, I would have been like, you 100%. Because I don't know. When you talk about Avatar, and it, in and of itself as a franchise, is absolutely massive. I mean, not as big now as it was when it first released. The first film came out, but still a massive property. And then you're talking about a game made by Ubisoft. It feels like it should be bigger. But then, of course, we have to remember that Ubisoft don't market anything anymore unless it's inside one of their own games. So
Oh, what I say, this guy, man, he's so on top of the news. News beat Jones. So you find him standing on your nearest street corner screaming extra, extra, because this guy knows all the headlines.
yeah, I do know the headlines. Would you like me to fill you in on the latest headline from
Sure.
Ubisoft?
Fill me, Jonesy.
So, of course, what we are referencing is the fact that Ubisoft, seemingly by accident, according to them anyway, decided that they would slip a few cheeky pop-up adverts into their Assassin's Creed games. But a lot of people didn't like the fact they did this, and so they disabled them, and they said that the pop-ups were in fact a technical error and they were not supposed to be in the games. I don't know how you... Jamie, you are more gaming like development adjacent to me. In your expert opinion, is it possible to accidentally slide in some adverts into a video game?
My gut reaction, Jonesy, and I do want to be as charitable as I can be to Ubisoft here, because mistakes do happen and things do accidentally slip into video games. But it's hard to see how an entire full screen ad can accidentally appear in a video. Well, put it simply, it can't accidentally appear in a video game. What can, I guess, happen is the context under which that ad was meant to appear, how people were meant to see it, like which menu they were meant to be in when it appears, that can all get messed up. And so the idea that maybe this ad appearing and taking up the entirety of the screen, for example, when the player goes to access the map. So you can imagine if you had your Xbox or PlayStation controller and you pushed, the modern day equivalent to the back button or the touchpad, and all of a sudden you were greeted with a full screen ad. That doesn't happen by mistake. That ad itself is an asset. That asset would have been made. Ubisoft, even with a company of thousands of people, where things can slip through lots of pairs of hands and slip through lots of fingers. Assets get made, they get signed off, they get added into games, all intentionally. So at some point or another, someone was comfortable, or even a large amount of people were probably very comfortable with a full screen ad making its way into the game.
Could they? Okay,
Was it
but
in
hold on though. You saying you seem to be saying no. What about if they slipped, knocked over a cup of water which was nearby a keyboard? Could that have caused a full screen pop-up ad to have
See,
appeared? I've seen films, Jamie. So don't think I'm an idiot. I've seen films where stuff can happen with glasses of water and computers. Could that have caused
do
the
you know
full
what?
screen pop-up ad?
What you're saying to me right now isn't even giving me the image of the glass of water being to blame. For some reason, I've got this like mousetrap style contraption in my head now, where a glass of water fell on a pencil that rolled off a table that landed on someone's shoe, which made them flick it up in the air, and then it hit a fan and it bounced over itself, which made the blinds get no, and all this rapid chain of events that led to one poor French developer like hitting return too early and putting this asset in the wrong place. Um, I don't know. When you look, oh, well, what I will say is that when you look at this ad in its own right, again, it's an ad that takes up most of the screen. It's for Assassin's Creed Mirage is the one in question. So I don't actually know which game you had to be playing. I think the person was playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and they got an ad for Assassin's Creed Mirage in the example that I saw.
And
Minus 20%.
20%
Sorry,
off,
go for it.
Jamie.
Yeah, 20% off. But you know what the other really incriminating piece of information is, Jonesy? That it
What's
was
that?
20% off as part of a Black Friday sale. And I don't know if you had your ear that close to the ground, but it turns out Black Friday was just last Friday. So that's the other thing that doesn't look particularly great. Is this was also an awkwardly well-timed advert, and you look at the two button prompts at the bottom of it. It's close and buy now, and you don't make the primary option on an advert to close it unless it's taking up real estate on a screen that you might want back as a gamer. Say, for example, if you were looking at a map. The more I think about it, the more I fear that this was a let's push this out to certain users, hope that it remains hush hush, and see what kind of analytics we get back in terms of how much people engage with it, how long they look at it for, how many people click on buy now, how many people click on close. And they found that the second it hit social media, as they should have seen coming a million miles away, people lost their heads.
There is an interesting thing about this though, and we've talked about it before, is that there is a lot of sort of hay made about what goes on in echo chambers, and we are part of one for sure. When we sort of complain about things as gamers that we don't like, and we say, how did they think they get away with this? And then we find out that they made $10 million in one weekend because of it, and we're like, oh, this is here to stay. This is something that we're going to complain about, we're going to moan about, but they made so much money that it's going to be a thing. When you sort of line up full price games, free to play games with things like battle passes, where do you feel that pop up ads for games, mobile game style, into AAA full price games, or maybe not full price games, maybe they cut a little bit off the top because they're going to stick some ads in there for you? How do you feel about them in general if they were to push forward with something like this?
Oh, I feel at least my experiences with mobile games have left me feeling pretty horrible about the whole practice. But then mobile games are a weird beast in their own right, because what you tend to find is and I guess what Ubisoft are exercising here a little bit is that ads piss people off. And so ads aren't a great way to build up positive rapport between a consumer and the product that you're trying to sell. So most of the ads that you are being fed when you're playing, say, a mobile game are for a different mobile game. Because like that's just the weird sort of like that you put it this way, you don't play a free to play game and get an advert with like saying, hey, here's 30 to 45 seconds explaining why you should buy microtransactions in the game you're already playing. It's, hey, here's 30 to 45 seconds on why you should be playing a completely different game, which is a bizarre kind of economy for something like that to exist on the mobile side. And clearly it works for both parties. I can't see it working particularly well for video games. And I think that would be a really weird, insidious, slippery slope that I hope we don't ever have to go down to figure out how poorly it would work. Like if you did all of a sudden get 1 minute long unskippable ads in Call of Duty talking about how good Assassin's Creed was, or why you should play Assassin's Creed, or letting you play some weird like low res fake demo of Assassin's Creed for 30 seconds where you run around until you run out of energy, and it's like you're gonna have to download the whole thing. But the key point is that the kind of premium video games that we're talking about at the moment aren't free, and so there isn't this sort of like just try before you buy or dip in and out kind of ethos as exists in the mobile gaming sector. And so things will be different. That said, I can't pretend that, as you pointed out earlier, that if there isn't, if the analytics don't prove that these things work in almost any respect, that we won't see more of them. This may have been a technical error in some respects. I doubt that it was entirely a technical error, but some elements of how and when and where and why it appeared may well have been. But if you told me there was a future where, I don't know, in a Call of Duty game, for example, you had to watch an in-game advert for like another game mode or a bundle they'd put in the store, or if they were selling other pieces of the game piecemeal, you had to watch an advert for that. And if you watched a 30-second advert, you might get a tiny amount of currency. Then maybe that is something that mobile games do at the moment, and that is maybe something that video games go towards in the future. Because, and sorry, I know I'm talking a lot here. When you look at the trajectory of how video games have shifted their core ideals towards player engagement, it's so far been the case in most things, not in all, that where free to play games have gone, video games on home consoles have soon followed, whether they're free to play or otherwise. And, we saw the movement away from DLC and season passes and map packs into the constant sort of gratification of receiving free content. We saw the move towards battle passes, and so on and so forth. Like, there is a lot of territory that was very well explored on mobile, and people tested it on home consoles, and it absolutely worked. Whether you're selling a game like Call of Duty or FIFA, or whether you're giving it away for free like Fortnite, and so when those kinds of people are making the decisions, and more often than not, those decisions are kind of validated by consumers falling for those practices or buying into them, no pun intended, then you've always got to presume the worst. I'm not excited about it. I'm not happy about it, but expect the worst when it comes to the way video games are going to try and monetize in the future. It's the way it's going to be.
I think if I was going to give them an out, and they say it's a technical error, I think what they really mean it was there's like a technician's error, and there was a meeting where they were talking about doing something like this, and someone implemented it. Took it down the line and said, okay, we're going to put this in. And then someone higher up said, no, we weren't going to do it yet. We were thinking of doing it. And, that was an idea we were floating and blah, blah, blah. I think if it was actually an error, I think that's how it's an error. The idea that it was a literal technical error is pretty ludicrous and fantastic.
From what I understand when I look at this image, like the fact that the art set was made, the fact that a designer sat down and made this minus 20%, like image, the asset itself, the fact that the copy was written, someone wrote the words Black Friday sale, someone, like came up with the sentence, take advantage of 20% off on the latest game in the series, exclamation mark. Like, there were multiple people in this process who all had to have made the same error for this, and again, that's why I can't believe that there are any errors in this asset existing. And when you look at the asset and the size of the asset and the two options in the bottom left-hand side of the asset, it all leads me to believe that something about this was very much intentional. It was probably the implementation that they think was the result of a technical error. Or it's all just a fucking excuse, that this is the I'm sorry I got caught of game design.
Which is ridiculous, because obviously how you can not get caught with something like this is how you think no one's going to say anything. We have got a couple of interesting comments coming in from the chat, which I think they may have nailed it, and I want to get your reaction to especially one of these ideas.
Oh God.
Al Ashley says DLC will be to make the game ad free in future, so there'll be DLC to get rid of the ads. And then Aim Nestor saying in the future it's going to be $70 for the game with ads, or the enhanced edition. Sorry, yeah, $70 for the game with ads, or the enhanced edition will be $90 with no ads. And then you're gonna have to decide which version you want to buy. Which version are you going for in that calculation? You
Much
drop
the
in an
same as
extra
with
20.
no, much the same as with the mobile economy. Well, it's difficult because with the mobile economy, it's sometimes like the economies of scale are fucking bizarre. Like you can get a game for free, and the ad and it can say block all ads or get rid of all ads for 9.99, and you're like, where the fuck did that number come from?
Yep.
I don't. So it remains to be seen what the video game equivalent of that. But as we said to Al Ashley's point about paying to remove ads, where free to play games, especially in the mobile market, which is light years ahead at the moment in terms of monetizing users, where they've gone before, like home consoles will either soon follow or at least try to. So yeah, that seems like a very possible end conclusion. Which version of a game would I buy? I don't fucking know. It's kind of like ads at the moment. Like there are like did I upgrade from Spotify to Spotify Premium because I wanted to stop listening to ads? Yes. When I was younger and I had less money, I dealt with the free version of Spotify for a long time. Eventually, I made that change. Um, do I deal with ads on the very tiny amount of free to play games that I've played over the last couple of years? In almost all cases, yes, I have dealt with those ads. Sometimes I've even willingly watched ads in return for various currencies and so on and so forth. I try not to play that many of those kinds of games, but sometimes one slips through the net. Um, so it would all depend. What I will say is I'm definitely not on the extreme end of the argument because I don't know what you think about this, but I saw a legitimate tweet and I say legitimate. That is, I say I'm not making it up. And it had thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of likes, and it was a response to this exact story we're talking about with the ad that popped up in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. And the body of the tweet was, "If this happened to me while I was playing a $70 video game, I would immediately uninstall it." And when I hear stuff like that, I'm like, it people might hate this, but it does take me back to where I was at last week, where like that whole thing about cutting off your nose to spite your face. Yes, it's annoying. Yes, it's a bad practice. No, we shouldn't encourage it. Yes we should put back against it. But no, don't uninstall the game you spent $70 for. Spent $70 on. Like play the game and have the fun that you paid for. Still, if
It's,
you can.
I don't think it's quite the same as when we were talking about battle passes though, because they are optional. If you're buying a product and then someone interrupts your enjoyment, or like we're saying in this instance, it was someone playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and they clicked on the map, and then the ad popped up full screen. Like that is interrupting, what you're doing, your flow of the game and everything. I think that is different than opting into a battle pass in that sense. I agree with you. I wouldn't like uninstall the game.
If anyone feels like that additional button press of closing the ad between wanting to see the map and seeing the map is a reason to not play an entire video game, I'm just not on that level yet.
Do you
I'm
know what
still on the side of I'm playing that video game.
I'll tell you what I would be tempted to do though. Head over to a review site, drop my score by 1 point, and then leave a review
Yeah,
saying, "Love the game, thought it was really good. Did not like the fact they have these giant pop-up ads in
yeah,
game. What is this, a mobile game?" And I
totally
think
valid.
if enough people did that, I think it would that would hinder their ability to do it in future. You'd hope, because often, especially with the way that deals work, you've got certain things tied to review scores, etc., etc. Often not the public generally, but I think critics would. I think critics go even harder than the public would if it became a thing that started to roll out and to be in
Oh
more
yeah.
games. I think critics would be even more damning of it.
I like well, you look at the way that even some of the biggest websites in the world, like IGN, for example, have pushed back against whether it's the unacceptably slimline campaign in this year's Call of Duty or the um, EA's really bad practice of taking the same version of FIFA and throwing it out on the Switch year on year, or the horrible performance of the recent Pokemon games on the Nintendo Switch. Major outlets are pushing back against bullshit, and I'd like to think this is the kind of bullshit that would also be a part of that. The extent to which publishers notice depends. Like, yes, you're right. Sometimes there are, bits of work and some end-to-end game development that's subcontracted out, and those contracts sometimes have clauses on it where bonuses are attached to certain Metacritic scores, and those people, I hope, would steer clear of any of that bullshit. But there are other companies that don't care about, like Activision right now aren't well, it's especially well, I guess more it's really Activision, Microsoft and Xbox now more than Activision, but they don't really care about Modern Warfare 3's Metacritic score at the moment. Um, yeah, but it's still an important way of voicing concern, disdain. How many other words can you come up with for it? Endless, for something that I hope doesn't catch on at all.
Agreed. No, I'm with you on that one. But talking about ways of voicing disdain and when you're unhappy with something, I should actually mention that we are contactable on YouTube and Twitter at SuperShow Pod. If you wanted to reach out to us, we are also on podcasting platforms, including Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, and many, many others. We're also on PaisleyRadio.com Thursdays at 10 p.m, repeated on Mondays at 10 p.m. See, we reversed it this week. We did the old housekeeping stuff further into the pod. And talking about monetization, hello. We also have a Patreon, and you can join up and become a patron of ours over at patreon.com/supershow. We are on the second to last day of the month, and something that we started doing 2 months ago now. Blimey, I must be that. Off the suggestion of one of our amazing patrons and contributors. Who was it? I can't remember who it was now. With the games.
Oh, don't ask me that.
I can't remember who it was. I apologise. Anyway, someone suggested that we do a list of the games that are going to be available and that are dropping in the coming month. And as it is nearly the start of December, we thought we would do that for you today. So Jamie has very kindly gone and scoured the internet for games that are coming out that you may be interested in over the course of December. So Steam World Build is coming December 1st. Avatar Frontiers of Pandora is coming December 7th. Arizona Sunshine is coming on the 7th as well. The day before on the 7th too. And House Flipper 2 is coming on the 14th. And Pokemon Scarlet and Violet DLC, the Indigo Disc, is also coming out on the 14th. So if you are looking forward to any of those, if you are particularly keen on House Flipper 2, for example, you can pick that up in December.
Yeah, it's funny you mention. I am actually quite curious about House Flipper 2. I played a demo of it, I think, during one of the Steam's big sort of like demo festivals, and I wasn't totally enamored with it, but it did have some cool ideas. So if it's in a slightly better place, or at least if they've got a nice roadmap in terms of content, then I look forward to giving it a go. Between that and figuring out if one, the day before is actually going to come out, and two, if the day before is going to be the day before in terms of what it's looked like in the trailers, it's going to be a fascinating month, but pretty short in terms of big AAA hitters.
It is a bit of a weird month. Like we were talking before the pod, Avatar Frontiers of Pandora is... Oh no, hold on. Was that in the pod? I can't remember. Blimey, my brain.
That was in the pod.
That was at the beginning, wasn't it? Avatar Frontiers of Pandora is going to be a weird one because we already know that Ubisoft don't do well at marketing games. For whatever reason, they just decide that's not a thing they do anymore, no matter how good a game seemingly is going to be. So the fact that I haven't seen it like everywhere doesn't actually worry me that much. It kind of makes me wonder even more if it's going to be an amazing property or whether it's just going to be another game that maybe we should forget about and move on, which is what I was thinking when I, from the stuff that I've seen up to this point. But as an Avatar game, it could be absolutely phenomenal. I don't think it will be, but...
Do you want my predictions?
Yeah, go on.
My predictions is that, as we discussed a lot around the time of E3 when the big gameplay blowout for Frontiers of Pandora happened, it's going to be labelled with the shorthand Far Cry with blue people.
Yep.
That's going to be a shorthand that most people are happy to agree with, apart from a small portion of people who get really into it and start to talk about the nuances of the game or the way it actually differentiates itself from Far Cry, although those people will, for the most part, be ignored. The Metacritic is going to come in totally fine. It's going to average a 76. No one's going to really hate it, but also very few people are going to totally love it. Lots of 7s. People who are slightly more generous will give it an 8, but as I said, net 76. And then by this time, no, I'm not going to say this time next year. I'm going to say by next summer, we'll get a Ubisoft earnings report that suggests that for some fucked up reason, the game that no one that bought actually did surprisingly well, and millions of people somewhere in the fucking world, probably in China, all bought Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora. I don't even know if they can buy it in China. I just know that Chinese people love Avatar.
I almost feel like, yeah, I think you're probably right. It's almost like was it Aquaman? That I saw Aquaman the movie,
Yeah.
and it was like, oh, that did $1 billion, over $1 billion at the box office, and I was like, how? Like, that was trash. Did it really do? But I couldn't believe it. Thought it was sounded very sus, but apparently it did. So there we go. I think you're probably right that Avatar will do pretty decent numbers for Ubisoft. I'm going to say that it's going to get more like a 69 than a 76. I feel like some people are going to be real harsh on it, and some people are going to go like, "Oh no, hey, if you like Avatar, there'll be a lot of. If you like Avatar, you should definitely play this game. There'll be a lot of that."
My thinking is that the people who go into it not liking Avatar, and there are a lot of those people who kind of have this. It's weird for a series that has only got 2 films. How many people identify as having Avatar fatigue? Like, it feels like sometimes there are more people with Avatar fatigue than there are with Star Wars and MCU fatigue. It's like, there have been 2 films in like 14 years. What do you mean you're fatigued?
I
Just
swear,
say you don't like them that much.
I swear that people had Avatar fatigue after Avatar, like after
They
the
did.
first one, which made no sense. I kind of feel like I was one of those people. Like, it was everyone kept talking about it all the time and how amazing it was. And like, yeah, it was good. It was Fern Gully, but for live action, and that's fine. But I was not looking forward to the second one particularly. But you know what? The second one was fine. I went and saw it at the cinema as well, and I thought it was okay. Like, I'm not hating on Avatar. I'm not saying it's incredible or awful. Like, I don't know, but we'll see.
Like, but people still went to see it. It's like I just remember thinking when the second one was about to come out that there's no way it can even get close to the first one, and like that's a $2 billion plus movie. It's like the third high. It's like it's the third highest grossing film of all. I think it's Avatar, the second Avatar, and Avengers Endgame are like the top 3 in some order.
Wow, I can't believe it's up there like that, to be honest. But
Yeah, it's
there you go.
the third high. Yeah, it's like it was gigantic. And again, international box office has a lot to do that. But it is a little bit weird when everyone you speak to is like, yeah, I either don't like Avatar, I don't care about Avatar, or I'm bored of Avatar. And the only people who you know who went to see it in the cinema are all like a couple of mates and your mum. And all of a sudden, it's another $2 billion movie. But I think the Far Cry fundamentals that are present in Avatar, as well as the fact that I think the visuals look quite strong and it looks like a fairly solid representation of that world. I think it's going to win a lot of naysay. I think there are going to be a lot of people who are going to get given a job to review Frontiers of Pandora, come in lukewarm, be pleasantly surprised, and that's where like some of the eights will come from.
Okay, yeah, no, I could see that, but hey, we don't have too long to wait. Because like we said, it's coming out on the 7th, which is just over a week at this point as day of recording. Arizona Sunshine 2. That's probably only one of the. I'm trying to think. Yeah, like, because I played Arizona Sunshine 1 on VR. Any of the other games in that list, obviously, I didn't play House Flipper 1. I've played obviously other Pokemon games, but I haven't played any of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Arizona Sunshine 1 was good, was fun. I haven't played it for a long time. I imagine this is going to feel, pretty much of a muchness. I'm assuming it is VR. I haven't even looked into anything about it. It'd be pretty weird if they suddenly made the shift into like first person, whatever. But that's one that I might be looking out for. You never know. I might dig the headset out and have a little go of Arizona Sunshine 2. We'll see.
Yeah, I've got a feeling there are maybe some slightly salty PSVR 2 owners out there who are looking at Arizona Sunshine 2 as potentially like something even if it is another game where you're standing around shooting zombies, it's something at least.
Yeah, and the first one was cool. Like, it was a fun game. It felt like a proper game, which I not when I was playing it back then. It often seemed like you were trying to sort of hop from experience to experience, and there weren't that many sort of fully fledged kind of games out there. But it was still pretty basic. Anyway, enough about games that are coming out. Sorry, go on.
I was going to say Arizona Sunshine 2 doesn't even have its own Wikipedia page at the moment, but it is coming out 7th of December. PSVR 2, MetaQuest, and Steam VR.
Okay. But we were talking about how Ubisoft monetize, and as I said, the way we monetize, apart from doing this and getting some ads on YouTube, is we have a Patreon. And if you'd like to become a patron, go over to patreon.com/SuperShow. Some people already did that. They are absolutely amazing individuals, and we thank them every single week because they are epic. And you will see that there are some names on screen right now. I would also like to give a shout out to some people for supporting us. I'm talking Aaron Cameron, Athletic Gravy, Brimstone, Ice Knock Rock Salt, Jesper Camden Nielsen, Pastors Guild, and the big dogs, the members of the board. I'm talking Brett Z, aka Shellshock, Geometric Potter, Hacksaw McReed, Manuel Guerrero, and Peaswad. So yeah, no, thank you to everyone for supporting us, supporting our Patreon, for going over there and signing up. It does indeed keep the lights on. It keeps us coming back week after week. It allows me and Jamie to get together and chat games, which we love to do. So thank you. Thank you, everybody, so much for that.
Well, speaking of us getting together and chatting games, I should say actually we did see Chris in the flesh since the last episode of this podcast, and we have tried to ply him with gifts and sexual favors in return for a cheeky appearance in the podcast. Nothing in the books just yet, but sit tight, folks. Hopefully, sooner rather than later.
But do you know what? The first thing he wanted to do when we saw him was chat games. So, hey.
Very true.
He should come on and we can chat. Because he's currently playing through Spider-Man 2, so he wanted to chat about some of that goodness. So,
exactly.
Hopefully.
And I said, Chris, legally speaking, I'm not allowed to talk to you about that game. You need to just listen to the spoiler cast once you've finished it, which is available to anyone who pledges at patreon.com/SuperShow at the $5 tier or above.
Absolutely. Do you know what else I haven't done? Another way people can support us, and I'm going to do this quickly, is by watching us live when we do this on YouTube, or just leaving comments. But I would like to just say hello to a few of the people that are chatting away in the chat right now, who often, a lot of these people join us every week when we go live, even though we are a day late today. Thank you so much for joining us again. So I'm going to say hello to Aim Nestus, Classy Cat, to Leo Dunlop, to B. Rao, Nick Leaks, Al Ashley, Rodrigo, Just a Guy, or see him. There we go. And I think that is everyone in the chat that I'm going to say hello to at the moment, because I can't see any other names. Not that I'm leaving anyone out. That would be weird, wouldn't it? One thing I want to know,
one
Jamie,
person you really don't like.
Yeah, now if I've missed out someone, I'm going to feel bad now, and they're going to be like, "Oh, Jonesy left me out on purpose." I didn't. I just had to spool through the chat and read quickly. So I apologise if I did miss anyone. But Jamie, what have you been up to in the world of gaming since we last chatted?
Mixture, really. A little bit of going back through a couple of titles that I'd missed from early on in the year, especially as end of the year discussions and Jeff Keighley's The Game Awards fast approach, but also playing something that wasn't released too long ago in the form of RoboCop Rogue City, which, you know what, I feel like, and I don't know, this sounds maybe a little bit unfair, and this isn't my way of trying to undermine what that game has to offer or anything like that, but I do feel like the thoughts that I shared on RoboCop around the time that we played the demo largely hold true when it comes to the finished article. That game is very much a case of what you see is what you get, and the fact that it has a demo is a thing of beauty. And it's one of those perfect situations where people like myself play that demo and they're like, actually, I do like what I've got a taste of here, and I do want more of this game. And so I'm gonna pick it up in due course. But it also just means that it is so sort of black and white that if you play that demo for yourself, or if you've just seen any volume of gameplay of this game, or you listen to us chatting about the demo a couple of weeks ago, whenever it was, then you, broadly speaking, know what you're in for with RoboCop Rogue City. I'd still just want to reiterate that game is bizarre in so many different ways, and it almost feels like it shouldn't work because that license is so difficult to adapt. Actually, SkillUp uploaded his review slightly after the fact, after we discussed the demo, for example, and he's a much bigger fan of the film series than I am, and he was talking about the intricacies of the differences between RoboCop and RoboCop 2, and the degree of satire and what it's actually satirizing, and where Rogue City taps into that, and where it's actually something very different, and where it's its own beast. And that was very interesting, because for me, I just kind of took that very kind of broad surface level reaction of oh, they're not taking this seriously, and neither did RoboCop. So and slapping the word satire and everything, even when sometimes I don't even because it's like,
is it satire? Does that work?
It's words like satire and irony. If you don't know what it is, call it ironic, call it irony, or satire. It's probably one or the other. But its fundamentals are still just fun, and I still think there's something really silly but also satisfying about literally clunking your way through, actually in some cases quite pretty and interesting locations, and just fucking throwing computers at people and having legs and heads fly off. You get to the point where you can mod your weapons by almost like you add these chips to these motherboards and you swap out through various motherboards to actually change that main. I forget what RoboCop's gun is called, but you can change it in some interesting ways. Like one of the first boards you get allows it to become fully automatic, for example, which is interesting in a way of keeping that gun relevant throughout that game's campaign,
Right.
which it should be, because it's the only weapon you have all the time. It's the only weapon that has infinite ammo. But that motherboard also had a chip in it that increased the degree of blood and gore that the gun produced. Well, it was totally unnecessary in a game that was already pretty gory. But as soon as you put it on, you're like, actually, this is way better because now there's, and that game, like the amount of decals that it preserves and how long they stay in certain locations for is quite wonderful. So it is kind of cool, like walking through a room after you've blasted everyone's heads off, and I'm making myself sound like a psychopath right now, but there are corpses everywhere. Every wall is riddled with bullet holes and blood, and there's broken bits of this, that, and the other. And it's still a very satisfying game to play. Their their kind of their choice to kind of create these mini hub worlds and populate them with side quests is again bizarre and leads to some really awkward and often poorly voiced NPC interactions. But at the same time, they're part of the charm that it feels like that needs to be there.
Right.
It's just the perfect like 7 out of 10 blocky, license based shooter.
And to be fair, I think
So, yeah.
a lot of those like 80s, 90s movies that you could do that to, that's kind of what they deserve, right? That you don't really need a full-fledged like balls to the wall Avatar, like Pandora sort of game. You just need
Right.
like, hey, it is what it
And like
is.
there are interesting ways it depends on the series, like slightly more like series and slightly more serious film franchises have been adapted in slightly more serious ways. Like we're still at the place with Alien where most of the attempts to adapt that into various video games over the years, be it like going all the way back to AVP and then more recently with Aliens Fighting Elite, and you had the Alien Isolation in the middle of all of that. They've all been pretty earnest attempts to kind of isolate either the action elements of Aliens or the horror elements of Alien and kind of adapt that fairly faithfully, and that makes sense. But like, yeah, when it comes to the RoboCops and the Starship Troopers and the of the world, like there's an earnest kind of trying to make it hard boiled sort of approach wouldn't make that much sense. You need to
No,
tap into the underlying themes and ideas that were present in the film. You need to have the same sense of fun and self awareness that those films had, that has let them age so well in some respects. And it's probably really difficult to capture, and you probably need a team that's really passionate about the franchise. And I think that the team behind Rogue City probably are really big RoboCop fans, and it shows.
do you know what? I saw a really random short pop up on YouTube about, I can't remember the actor's name, but the guy who played the original RoboCop in the original trilogy.
Peter
Trilogy?
Weller.
I don't
It,
know.
it is a trilogy, but he only played it. He only played RoboCop in two. I think RoboCop 3 was the one that was like they completely fucked now. Like
Right.
2 was worse, but some people were like, okay, like it's different and it's worse, but it's still RoboCop for the most part. And 3 was out where they're like, nope.
Well, like, it's talking about how they didn't, were being, was it satirical? Did they take themselves seriously? But yeah, this really weird story where, like, I think it was like a lighting tech said he was eating Oreos, and the guy who played RoboCop was like so into his own character, like he wouldn't break character, and he kept referring to himself as Robo, and that they were up on some platform, and the lighting tech was like eating Oreos, and he said, and he kept calling himself Robo. He wouldn't call himself by his name, and he said Robo wants an Oreo. And the guy said, Robo can't have an Oreo, but Peter can if he wants an Oreo. And then the guy's like, Robo wants an Oreo. And so the dude, and then apparently he then told like the director and on the radio, on the director radio, the lighting text, like, can you please give Robo an Oreo? And he stuffed like 4 of them in his mouth at once, chewed them all up, crumbs going everywhere, and went, I haven't got any more Oreos. And apparently it's on like some director's commentary or something, but the actor says he doesn't remember it at all and that it didn't happen, but this lighting tech guy swears by it, which just sounds hilarious to me. Like the idea that you won't break character playing RoboCop because you're so like method or whatever. This is very strange, but
Well, you'll be glad to hear that not only is Peter Weller still alive and well, Jonesy, but he continues to voice RoboCop in RoboCop Rogue City. So,
I wonder
um,
if he only would be referred to as Robo during the recording of the scenes.
I wonder.
I'd be interested to know. Oh, okay. Yeah, there we go.
Uh, um,
Anything else you've been playing?
yeah, I just want to give a quick shout out to Dredge, which obviously was relatively acclaimed. It feels like when that came out earlier in the year. I think it came out back in March. One of those games that picked up a lot of steam. Oh god, I just realised I made a horrible pun accidentally. Picked up a lot of steam as a very solid Steam Deck title, Jonesy, as it turns out. And then I was kind of, it was on my radar, but one of those ones where, ironically, even when the games cost like 15, 20, 25 pounds, you're like, half in, half out, kind of let it mellow. And then it popped back up again when it was nominated for a Game Award for Best Indie Game. And I was like, oh yeah, Dredge. I never played that. So I picked it up. I've played maybe like 4 or 5 hours or so, all on the Steam Deck. Um, and sure enough, the Steam Deck is the perfect vessel for that game. And it's really interesting. Like anecdotally, first of all, I'll say it's very interesting that two of my favorite, and I'm not going to wade into the debate that Jeff Keighley waded into today, but two of my favorite small scale games that were released in 2023 are both games that fundamentally revolve around the economy of catching and selling, or in other ways utilizing fish, mixed with different themes and ideas and tones and stuff like that. They, of course, being Dave the Diver and Dredge, but they take very different approaches because while Dave the Diver is a game about catching fish and then serving those fish as sushi in the evenings, Dredge is a game about catching fish and selling them to make more and more upgrades to your boats to allow you to go further afield, but all set in this sort of, I guess you'd call it like a small open ocean world that is very Lovecraftian in its nature and taps into some of the same ideas that games like Eternal Darkness have tapped into in the past, where if you stay out past sundown or sunset, and you're still sailing or fishing in the dark, then there is kind of a panic meter that begins to settle in, and the captain of this boat, the player character, becomes more and more sort of like paranoid, and you can start having visions, and that's where some very kind of like creepy Lovecraftian sort of elements, some eldritch elements, start kind of factoring into the plot. It also has this very overbearing dark tone throughout, lots of very creepy music that seems tonally fitting. All the NPCs you speak to are kind of all very like mysterious and very clearly trying to obscure the secrets of the town that they live in and the secrets of the waters that surround the towns that they live in. And it does this really interesting thing where it's kind of like it blurs the lines between what's real and what's imagined and what is the result of this, the captain's kind of like paranoia and tapping into, I forget what the phobia is, but people sort of like the fear of the sea and this kind of the great unknown, and it's
Right.
so deep and it's so ever expanding and so dark that you never truly know what creatures might live down there, and kind of tapping into that and incorporating it into this dark, um, like, but at the same, a fishing game of all things. Like again, fundamentally, like there are like multiple different mini games for catching like various kinds of fish, and you need to upgrade your rods or your nets and so on and so forth. So like there are like coastal fish, and there are ocean fish, and there are like shallow swimming fish, and like you need. So it's got all the depth of that kind of stuff. People who like earning money, upgrading something to go out and earn more money, but at the same time, if you like monsters and Lovecraftian horror and you know tapping into the fear of the unknown and thalassophobia or whatever it's called, like then it's very cool. It's very cool.
Nice. Sounds good. Sounds interesting.
Yeah.
If it's a
How
game, if
about
I play it
yourself,
and it's
Major
just a
Sir?
game about fishing, I'm gonna be I'm
I
gonna be somewhat
you will definitely don't go into it if all you want to do is fish.
right.
That's for sure. But also don't go like if you want more than just fishing, you will find more than just fishing. And the mystery there are mysteries within. There are characters. There are story threads. There are challenge like that. It's not a fishing game. Uh,
Okay.
you know.
Right. I've had a bit of a weird one on the gaming front this week. I ended up playing two games a bit randomly, off the back of a YouTuber that I watch. A Twitch streamer, but he also does like shorts and things. And he's a dev for a developer called Pirate Software. I see him pop up sometimes, watch some of his stuff, and I'd meant to play his game for a while, and I'd hopped onto Steam, picked it up because it was on sale. And then there was another game which he'd mentioned as well that he said is a great game to play if you're like if you think about making games, blah 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 blah, which I have in the past. So the game which is only about an hour and a half long, which I played and finished, it was called The Beginner's Guide, which is a 2015 game, which is from the guy who made the Stanley Parable, which is was a good game, a bit weird. I'm not sure if I'm happy with how it all rolls out. If it was like, but then, you know, with the sort of game it is, it's like a very narrative first person game where you're the idea is he's walking you through a bunch of games that a friend of his made, and they're all supposed to be different games, but they're all intertwined, and the themes are all like linked together, and it's all about like creativity and loneliness and development and like hooks, and it's quite a sort of a meta fourth wall breaking game, which was interesting, something very different. So I enjoyed it for that. And then I've started to play the guy from Pirate Software's game, Heartbound, which is a fun little RPG. It reminds me of Undertale a bit, but I think maybe that's only because I haven't played a similar game since that would be more like it. But no, enjoying that so far. Again, I think it's only like a few hours long, but I'm probably like half an hour or so into it, where you play as a little boy whose dog disappears, and then you are not quite sure if you're like asleep or if you're dreaming, and you go into these strange worlds and meet up with like weird talking animals, and you're like trying to solve this riddle of like where your dog's gone and track down this strange alien creature that seems to have stolen it. But yeah, like I said,
what's it going for tonally? Like, is it funny?
No, it's kind of a little bit like not dark, but maybe a little bit dark, and it's a little like there are some parts which feel a little bit sinister, but no, on the face of it, it kind of feels like it's, I don't even know. Yeah, not comic, not satirical. It is an art, like just a little RPG of a kid whose dog goes missing, and you think he might be dead, but it's also very Undertale-y, and you're not supposed to. Sometimes you don't know if you've made the right decision about how to engage with a certain situation. Like you might meet a boss that you think, I've got to kill this boss, but actually it might have been that rather than kill the boss, you should have not, and you should have like let them hit you, and then it would have. And there's even some kind of. There are strange characters that pop up and you can interact with and you get frustrated with, and then they sort of reference the fact that you're not ready to speak to them yet, and then you get dropped back in the game and they're like, you haven't learned anything. So it's weird. It's a little bit dark. It's a bit fanciful. No, but cool and fun and some interesting ideas. So yeah, looking forward to finishing it off in the coming week.
Interesting. Yeah, no, it sounds. I don't know if I'm just reading too much into that final example you gave, but it does sound like some of the kind of the meta things that were going on beneath the surface of Undertale might be present there, which is interesting. And in a sense, you've played two very meta video games, each in their own way. Video games that kind of acknowledge the process of making video games, which is fun.
Yeah, I don't know why I'm in that headspace at the moment. But then to throw that on its head, I saw something. I went to see Hunger Games: The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, I think it's called, which is the prequel to the Hunger Games trilogy.
Right.
Hasn't done too well critically. It hasn't, some people have criticised it, said that, on review front, have not said it's very good. I enjoyed it. I liked it. I enjoyed the Hunger Game trilogy beforehand. More so because I enjoyed the books before I saw the films. And I think when you do it that way round, like films are kind of like a cherry on top because you get to like visualize a lot of the stuff which you've read. And even if they don't live up to the books, you still get to enjoy it from that aspect. The prequel is a bit weird in that I think it's trying to do a lot so it's a 2.5 hour film, which is not short for a Hunger Games movie. But it kind of feels like they didn't have time to fit everything in that they wanted to. The beginning, like I'd say, like the first 2/3 are absolutely fine, and then for me, the final third just the clip that it has to get through the rest of the story in, it's moving too fast for me.
Is it based off a book, or is this one an original
No,
movie?
it is based off a book, which I didn't realize the book was
Oh,
released back in
okay.
2020. So the first thing I did when I got home after seeing it was I bought the book,
Right, so
because
you're doing it the other way around this time.
I'm doing it the other way around, because I'm like, hold on, there's more here. Like, I'm missing so much stuff, and the way that the characters progress, and the way that like people change their tone, and people have like, they just seem to have these total like character reversals and things, just doesn't quite fit in the film. But then at the same time, it's like it's 2.5 hours long. They would have needed like 3.5 hours to maybe do it justice. But if you're into that series, then yeah, I think it's definitely worth a watch. I think it because it's the story of President Snow when he's like younger and how he gets into it. I will say Viola Davis is absolutely cracking. Like, she's phenomenal. Was like the head game maker. I think that she's called. She is. Just as this,
You could bet your house on her being good whenever she
yeah,
pops up.
exactly. Like, she plays this wacky, over the top, insane scientist, and there's a lot of good performances in it. Like, I enjoyed. Is it Rachel Ziegler, the actress that was supposed to be Snow White, is very good.
Yeah, is she the one that was in West Side Story?
I don't know. I
I
think it's
don't
the.
know, I might be reaching with that one actually. Maybe we move on.
I'm not sure, but and the guy, I don't know his name, but the guy that played young President Snow as well was very good. But yeah, no, it's a good film for filling out more of the world, the Hunger Games world, but definitely needed a bit more work when it comes to like how they get that story across. Maybe the book's the same. I don't know. I'll have to read the book and then get back to you. But anyway, that is enough about
Yeah.
me.
I know I was going to say I'm clearly wrong because I'm looking at how much it's made and it's already made. Let me get the best figures I can. Just shy of $200 million worldwide, off a budget supposedly of around $100 million. So it looks like it's going
Okay.
to do completely fine considering it's a pretty recent release. Um, but I don't know if this is like a weird selective thing where my brain is now able to tune out things that it knows I'm not interested in whenever I'm like in earshot or eyeshot of an advert or something like that.
Right.
But this was a film that I kind of knew was happening, and then all of a sudden it was just out, and no one I knew was prior to this conversation was even talking about it.
I
And
wasn't
when
talking
I
about it.
think, yeah,
It kind of passed me by, and it was only when my wife said, "Shall we go and see the Hunger Games film?" And I was kind of like, "Oh, is that out?" I was like, "Yeah, let's go see it." So
weird.
it was a
Okay.
bit bizarre. It
And
was
the other
strange.
question I have, and again, this might actually be something that would like has already happened in a previous Hunger Games film, but I haven't actually seen any of them outside the first one. Is there an actual Hunger Games in this film?
So yes.
Okay,
So
good,
because
good.
yeah, what is strange is, so the first two, like the 2/3 of the movie are, I really enjoyed, like, because it's it's Rachel Ziegler's character. I think her name is uh, something Gray. I can't remember her name. But yeah,
Lucy Gray Baird.
Lucy Gray Baird, thank you. So she gets picked to be in the Hunger Games, and actually the film starts out with, and then she gets Snow as her mentor, and so the first 2/3 of the are how that all plays out. So she becomes the contestant. She goes into the Hunger Games. He is her mentor, and it's like their relationship. It's her in the Hunger Games. It is very similar, I would say, in some respects to the first film. In that it seems to be the main focus is the Hunger Games, which is where I think the film is the strongest, and also their relationship and how their relationship builds mentor and mentee. For me, it kind of falls apart when it goes beyond that, because we know that the guy in this film is going to become this evil, sadistic, fascist dictator, President Snow, by the first Hunger Games movie. So you've got to get from his character at the beginning of this, where he is, totally different. He's young, poor, quite kind, and like wants to help people, and is personable. How he travels from that to this evil, like, arch villain, and for the first 2/3 of the film, like, I don't know, I didn't think they did enough of the transition. So then they're thinking they've got a lot of work to do to get him to complete
Yeah,
that journey.
It's like Red Dead Redemption 2. Like, how is this Dutch going to end up being the Dutch that I know, or how is this John Marston going to end up being the John Marston that I know?
Exactly.
Must be such an interesting challenge to take on, narratively speaking, and incredibly hard to do in 2.5 hours. One would imagine.
Yes, exactly. That's why. Yeah. So it's. But no, yeah. If you're into the series, I think go see it. It was enjoyable. It was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
And for I was going to say, for a series that usually has like more experienced kind of actors like filling out smaller roles, usually wearing heavy makeup and wigs and completely overdoing it, but in the best possible way. You mentioned Viola Davis, but I also think adding Peter Dinklage and Jason Schwartzman to the ranks sounds pretty inspired.
Yes. Yeah. They were all great. Like it's one of those where I think. That even if you sort of see it and think, oh, okay, this didn't quite live up to my expectation, there's some fantastic performances in this. And as you said, Hunger Games is a great film for allowing people to kind of just go crazy on a character because they're so over the top.
Stanley Tucci was the best part of the first film.
So yes, and his predecessor in this, who I guess is one of his ancestors or his granddad or something, is even ramps it up even more. And Peter Dinklage kind of plays this tortured, drunkard professor guy, which is like again, it's great. It's great. From a character perspective, it's very good.
On brand.
On brand. But anyway, let's move on from us and let's talk about some more gaming news. So the next story we have got is that Rockstar veterans are joining forces, and also some cheeky little secrets may have been revealed from Rockstar itself. So obviously we know that GTA 6 is going to be coming out. I was going to say this month. It's not this month. It's next month because we're still technically in November.
For GTA 6.
So a trailer? Did I say the game?
Slow roll a little bit. We don't want to send too many virgins on Twitter into a headspin.
Sorry, the trailer for GTA 6 is going to be coming out next month. So we're all pretty excited. But Dan Houser, who formed transmedia firm Absurd Ventures that we've talked about before on the podcast earlier this year, he has now been joined by Laszlo Jones and Michael Unsworth, his former Rockstar. I don't even know the word. Comrades. Let's go with comrades.
Comrades, co-workers. Are we going to say contemporaries?
I was going to say contemporaries, but I feel like that's not necessarily people who work with you. That's just people from your, same era in the same area.
They all kind of work in their own way, but
they do. So Laszlo Jones was the co-chair of Rockstar's production department for 19 years, while Michael Unsworth was the series writer on games like GTA 5, Red Dead Redemption 2, and he was there for 16 years. So they have both now joined Absurd Ventures with Dan Houser, as we said, and they are going to be joining as the head of story and creative management. And they have also filed 2 trademarks: American Caper and A Better Paradise. So, because I know we talked about these guys before, and obviously they're a multimedia sort of company. They do a whole bunch of stuff. Do we know if American Caper and A Better Paradise are what they are going to be?
So I did look at the trademark listings for them, and you know what they can kind of be like, where they list all these words, and it is kind of like really confusing, and really they're just covering themselves off to make basically whatever they want. But it does sound like video games. So, for example, the American Caper trademark is for goods and services, downloadable computer software for playing computer and video games, downloadable software for use in playing online computer games. But then it goes down to like digital autographed items, decorative magnets, phone cases, headphones, robots, interactive maps, electronic handheld gaming unit other than those adapted for use with an external display, screen or monitor, computer game software for use on mobile and cellular phones, computer software for playing video and computer games, downloadable podcasts, fine art prints, acrylic prints, so they've obviously got it. They covered off everything that you need to do to both make a product and obviously merchandise that product. But in terms of what it could be, in terms of, is it a wholesale, video game in a traditional sense, or is it a mobile game, or is it something weird in between, whatever, they kind of...
Or they're just covering all their bases. Or they've been like, we don't know what we're going to do, so we're just going to like try and hit everything before we sort of actually even know what this is going to be.
Well, that kind of also, holds some water with what we understand, or rather, I guess, how little we understand Absurd Ventures to be. You can go to the Absurd Ventures website right now, and it kind of is a bit bizarre, other than being a little bit cringe, and they're clearly trying to go for that. Hey, we're disruptors. Like you ain't seen media
Yeah.
till you've seen us, motherfucker. Kind of like edgy, new wavy kind of, and it's like, all right, just make a fucking video game, boys. Um, Other than a lot of that going on, it's not really clear like what they want to do, other than the fact that they want to be disruptors and they want to set the record straight. What are they? There's a quote that I saw earlier. I want to see if I can find it, but you might have to bear with me while I do.
I think it's one of them where you think either the fact that the fact that Dan Houser has managed to rope in like two long-term employees of Rockstar is either like a really good, really strong sort of indication that they're doing some exciting stuff behind the scenes, or maybe it's a bit like, don't really know what we're doing here. We need to get some other big boys on side, and these two people I know are good. So it could totally be one or the other. But I remember when we talked about Absurd Ventures like back in the day, it was a bit of a it was kind of like, oh, okay, what cool games are they going to be coming out with? And then we just saw
Yeah.
some of the video stuff they put out. Was like, oh, they have no idea. They literally have
Well, like,
no idea what they're doing.
so there's this
Not no
sub
idea what they're
menu.
doing, as in they don't know, no idea where they're going to go with what they're doing. Is what I'm trying to say.
Oh,
They, they have the
yeah, totally.
skills. They just don't. I don't think they knew creatively where they wanted to be at.
But even having the skills, like, and even having the skills and having a combined, probably just shy of 30 years experience, making some of the most commercially successful video games of all time, they are still, starting from, from scratch. I'm not going to say
Yeah.
rock bottom because there'll be plenty of, venture capitalists and people of that nature who will pump all the money into this that's needed. But, they're making new games, they're making new IPs, and gaming's a complicated world right now. That they left at a time where their former company was having more difficulty with its flagship franchise than ever before. So they go into this knowing that things are complicated. But the I will say that when you go onto the website and pull up the little sub menu, each time you pull it up, you get a different like phrase, and this is what I was referring to. So
Oh
what I've
yeah,
got
I
is
forgot about that.
stoking moronic outrage since yesterday. Derivative stories, wretched jokes, heartfelt selfies. I'm just going to do it over and over again until I get like. And so the crisis continues.
Hot takes,
Custom
trash
built
opinions.
gibberish, trying to come good in the end. Finally, an American institution everybody can hate. Meanwhile, I'm looking at this weird like thing that looks like the aliens from the film AI Artificial Intelligence with a circle that says persona, ego, self, shadow, animus, anima. Like there's all kinds of just weird shit. But I guess to get back on track, sorry, I think the interesting hire here, Laszlo being involved doesn't surprise me that much. Laszlo is kind of like has always been a figure behind the scenes at Rockstar, and how much he actually contributed to the active development of some of their most successful games. It's hard to say. Michael Unsworth was a key kind of writer on. Well, he was there for a long time. I know his credits go back to at least GTA 4, but by the time you get to like GTA 5 and Red Dead Redemption 2, Unsworth was one of the key kind of like figures from on the narrative side of those games development. And so for him to be on board as head of story, and for a company to even have a head of story, it is the clearest indication we've got so far that there are, perhaps unsurprisingly, going to be more traditional narrative driven elements or components to what hopefully end up being video games. And I think that's nice to have confirmation because as these big Rockstar guys, like Leslie Benzies, for example, have left and gone off to, um, I was going to say greener pastures. Let's just say pastures new for now. We don't know the colours yet. Um, Greener pastures, there's definitely money there. Um, like you saw what he did with what's it called, Everything or Everywhere or
Everywhere.
Everywhere, and you're like, okay, that's a guy who has Grand Theft Auto written all over his CV, going in and getting as big a check as he possibly can, and making a metaverse game. And it's kind of like, okay, fine. When you hear about like Dan Houser rehiring Michael Unsworth and making trademarks like American Caper, you're like, oh, maybe they are just like, maybe they did just want to make a new company, start like keep the headcount lower, less, have one studio based in one location rather than being this big, multi-thousand people international empire. Keep it kind of succinct, retain a little bit more like creative freedom, relinquish some of the pressures they probably felt from being responsible for one of the most successful and beloved franchises of all time. And maybe that it's creatively stimulating to just kind of do a startup again. Like it happens all the time in entrepreneurship. You see people turn small companies into multi-billion-dollar companies, and then they're like, "I'm out and I'm doing it all over again." That does get people out of bed in the morning, and maybe it's no different for game devs.
Maybe it does. I think the one thing that I wonder when it comes to things like game devs, though, is it's all well and good going from like a massive company like Rockstar, with loads of people on board, and to say I'm going to do things on a smaller scale. But it must be a bit of a culture shock to kind of be one of the people near the top of the pile or at the top, and then to kind of say, all right, we're going to build a game, and suddenly you have a tiny team, and anything you could possibly think of, like if you wanted to make something a fraction as complicated as Grand Theft Auto, like GTA 5, for example, it's going to take a small team decades to do it. Like, so then you need to go much more simple. And I don't know. And some people I'd worry don't have the capacity to do it. Like, I know this isn't quite the same thing, but we've both done this where you work with producers, for example, who say, "I want this," and you think, "Okay." And then they'll sort of give you what they want, and you're like, "This, I can't, like, no, I can't do that. That's going to be impossible. I'm not an animation studio, or I'm not an entire team of people who can produce a video and da 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 da." And you think, like, and I sometimes worry that people like this have the same perspective where they think, "Oh yeah, we're going to do this." And in some respects, I would rather they did something like Leslie Benzies did and just go out there and say, "This is the game we're making. This is how it's going to be. This is what's coming," because they will solve the issues they bump into with, like, do they need a bigger team? Do they need more people? Do they need more investment? Whereas the thing I worry about with something like Absurd Ventures is if you're just getting ideas people on board, you're just spinning the wheels, burning money before you actually start putting out content. Like, and even coming out with, we're going to make American Caper, we're going to make a Better Paradise. Like, if you aren't making yet, if you're not in the creation process and it has been, a few years, you've got to add another decade to when you're actually going to put something out. I don't know. Maybe I'm pessimistic.
Maybe, but then we just don't know how big they're shooting for here, right?
Absolutely, and maybe I'm totally wrong. Maybe they will completely rein in their expectations about what they can build and how big it can be. But it's just like games just seem to take so long to make these days, and they take so many people just to come out with like things that seem relatively simple, because of course they're not. They're not simple at all. They're incredibly complicated, and they take a long time to take a lot of people. Right. And so I do worry that people, and then it will be 10 years down the line before we see anything. But you never know.
There's also the element that wanting to maintain a smaller headcount or like a more streamlined studio is also just speculation on my part. Like maybe he doesn't give a shit about headcounts, and maybe Absurd Ventures have 500 employees by the end of next year.
Totally true. And maybe they've just learned to keep their cards close to their chest, Rockstar style, and so we don't know, as much as we think we would know.
Well, the Laszlo Jones and Michael Unsworth things have become news this week, but Unsworth, I think, has been there for 6 months now. We just didn't know.
Yeah. So keep secretive. But actually, this week, Jamie, we've learnt some secrets from Rockstar. Not in any sort of like dodgy, sort of clandestine, cheeky way, but through the simple process of an ex-employee from Rockstar North, Obi Vermeji. I don't know how to say his name. I apologise, Obi, if I've said your name wrong. Obi Vermeij. Let's go with that.
Step in, but watching you try it all again and taking a completely different angle of approach was very entertaining. Can you give us the third take?
Obi Vermeij.
Actually, Vermeij, because there's no way you pronounce that J at the end of the surname. So Vermeij might be the best bet so far. I'd say it's probably something like Obi Vermeij.
Let's go Obi Vermeij. So Obi Vermeij, who is an ex-Rockstar North developer employee. Sorry, ex-Rockstar North developer. Employee. I said it right. Has did come out with a blog that was pretty short-lived. He was at the company for 14 years. And so, I'm sure, like a lot of us would do, thought people probably would be interested in what happened while I was there. So he decided to blog this. What is wrong with that? Absolutely nothing, right? He put out some, interesting stories and some little unknown factoids. But as I said, it was very short-lived because in Obi, is that what you're going with? Obi? In Obi's words, some of the OGs are upset from Rockstar. And there was something about ruining the Rockstar mystique or something. So he has pulled the blog down. Which is kind of unfortunate. I feel sorry for him. Like he was there for 14 years. He should be allowed to sort of like put some stuff out there. I don't think he hasn't been putting anything out there which is like, private, insanely private or secretive. It doesn't seem. So let's go through some of the stuff that he did drop. So he was talking about the development of the original GTA trilogy and Manhunt, but he did reveal a few. See, I don't even know if I call them secrets, like things that people didn't know yet. But are they secrets if they happened in the past?
I think that's an interesting question that kind of is what this whole story hinges on. Really.
Exactly. So there was a 1970s Cold War James Bond-like action game called Agent. Was it? Well, I guess it was just like titled Agent for them. That was cancelled.
Yeah, and that was announced as well. An Agent was like a thing for a while.
I don't remember that at all. But so that was too much of a distraction apparently from Grand Theft Auto, so they decided to can that. They also had a short-lived zombie game which was in development following Vice City's release, set on a remote Scottish island. Which that actually sounds wicked. Imagine a game, where it's all set on a small Scottish island and there are zombies there. I think just the cast of the people you'd meet would be pretty fun.
He said that it was using the Vice City engine, and that most of the gameplay that they had experimented with, I think they only worked sort of like a month before all agreeing to just move on. But most of the gameplay they experimented with was around like scrounging for fuel and stuff like that. Almost sounded like Days Gone.
Right, maybe, that was Days Gone that never was. The fact that GTA 3 was apparently originally prototyped for the Dreamcast. He also came out of the factoid that San Andreas had around 70,000 bugs, which was doubled when they released GTA 4. 140,000-ish bugs, which is a hell of a lot of bugs. But then big games, complicated games, so you can appreciate that, why there would be that many. I also wonder if that would include the same bug repeated. Like if you had a bug when cars turned, let's say, for example, when they glitched, I wonder if they would count that as an individual bug if every car had the same bug.
It was really interesting hearing him describe it. I don't know how they would deal with a case like that, whether that would be multiple bug reports or one individual bug report. But he talks about like in GTA 3 how the way they handled bugs at the time was that they would, like the testers or the QA team would physically print out a piece of paper with as much info about the bug as possible, and people would have stacks of paper on their desks. And if you looked at a bug and it was more relevant to someone else, you'd go over and put it on their pile, and developers would just work. Then that's what a lot of the crunch was, because especially with Vice City, because obviously he talks about how Vice City was made in a year, and they got 6 weeks off, I think it was, a holiday after 3, and then came back and had less than a year to make Vice City. But it says because that's why, like, apparently under the hood, and I guess you can tell when you play them, 3 and Vice City, like engine wise, are basically identical, and most of the work went into creating a new map. Like things like that changed the feel of it a lot, like a new front end and weather and music. And then a lot of the other work went into story and writing, and how they were like desperate to get a big star, and they were really glad Ray Liotta said yes, and all that kind of stuff. I like all kind of things that are obvious reading between the lines, but because no one from Rockstar talks, it's just like, oh, cool.
And it's funny you said about like Vice City being made in a year, because even though it was made in a year, that I think they did a lot in a year. That was a hell of a jump from like 3 to Vice City. I think when it primarily, like you say, from the story front, from the voice acting front, I think there was a hell of a lot done between those two games. And then the last little tidbit we got was that Manhunt was originally designed to be first person, so you could have murdered people even closer up than you got to do with Manhunt.
Yes. I think with there's a lot of mention of Leslie Benzies being the person who would kind of come in, make a big executive decision, and was almost always right. And Benzies was the one that apparently was like, right, Manhunt's third person, end of conversation. And Obi is like, and yeah, like usually when Leslie made a call like that, he was correct. And he would talk about how there were a bunch of issues with the first person version with like Like things like when you climb a ladder, there was no way to like see what if anyone was behind you, and weird stuff like that. And how early on in Manhunt they had this really ambitious system where enemy characters, the hunters that kind of come after you in Manhunt, were grouped up into groups of four. And in each group of four, there would be one person who was designated as a leader and would essentially issue instructions to the other three based on like what was going on. So if someone noticed something amiss, they would report it to a leader, and the leader would report it over like a walkie-talkie that the player could hear to
Mm.
tell the other three, like, "Hey, go and scan this room because the guy was seen here." And that all got cut because the guy who was leading that system left, but they
Oh,
kept the walkie-talkie system. But instead, it was all like scripted, basically, like scripted events. Um,
that's what I
and
can't
like little
imagine.
things about, yeah.
I can't imagine
Sorry.
what Manhunt would have been like as a first-person game. I think it would have looked even because at the time it looked. I thought it looked good. I was like, oh, this is
Well,
as you would.
that's the other thing. He said so when they moved on from when they moved on from DMA design, there was like the GTA team and the Manhunt team, and the Manhunt team was different. And because Manhunt wasn't open world, they used this different technology where it wouldn't render because a lot of it was interiors. It wouldn't render rooms you couldn't see, which meant that they had like loads more capacity to work with in terms of like memory and stuff like that.
Right.
And that allowed things to kind of. That's why Manhunt was sharper in some respects than obviously. But then there were also a lot of shared assets because Obi talks about how he had to come over from the GTA team and help Manhunt get finished, and like a lot of the visual effects stuff were like copied, which is why if you see like newspaper clippings on the ground, some of them were the same in Manhunt and GTA, and
Ah.
like little hacks like that.
Well,
And how Obi was one of the people who, when they were making GTA 3, and he admits he was totally wrong, but Obi was adamant that GTA 3 needed to maintain the top-down camera perspective, and
oh,
he made a top-down camera and was like the third-person camera has to be just an option in the options menu, and he said it was Leslie Benzies who was like it's a third-person game, no ifs, no buts, and he's like yeah, and Leslie was right
and he
again.
nailed it. But as you can tell, Jamie has read the blog, and you may be a little bit upset that you can't read the blog because it was taken down. However, if you wanted to have a go, if you wanted to go and have a read for yourself, you can access it still via the Wayback Machine, and you can see what Obi had to say from his own keyboard. So yeah, there you go.
Super interesting read. Even though they're really short, it's kind of like one sort of short blog for each game, pretty much. But just like yeah, fascinating, totally fascinating. Still the single most secretive company, like relative to their size and reach in the maybe it, but I'm not going to say any industry. There are probably some pretty secretive companies in like the sex industry or something like that. But in video games,
They are, but yeah, they're
no one
very
thinks twice.
secretive. But and often, you don't. A lot of companies like to try and keep things to themselves, and it just gets leaked. A lot, and then Rockstar want to keep stuff to themselves, and they manage to, which is why it's so surprising because it just doesn't usually come out. Which is why this doesn't feel like a leak, because like I said, because this feels like an after the fact. This is like a memoir or someone reminiscing, and the fact that Obi took it down when they asked him to, I think, even though he's not there anymore, is sort of saying something about still obviously has a lot of good feelings for like the company and for the people that he worked with.
Yeah.
Sometimes, though, you don't have to wait for a company to have someone from the inside tell you what they're thinking, because sometimes they click on Steam, they come right out and tell you what they're thinking, as Bethesda have been doing this week in our final story on the SuperShow. So this is the story that Bethesda customer support have been replying to individual Starfield players on Steam who have left negative reviews. This is easily the most fun story of the week that I've seen.
It's fucking crazy.
It's not even it shouldn't be crazy, but it is crazy because at the same time it does feel like something it feels like something surprising, and you feel like it's almost like someone, a celebrity, being criticized on Twitter, and then they want to tweet at everyone who's criticizing them and tell them why they're wrong. It feels like the same energy as that, which is why it's kind of weird, because what has been happening is, so let me set you up, and then we'll actually talk about what they've been what they have been saying to people, because it is quite fun, as we said. So Starfield is currently sitting with mixed review status on Steam. They've got 69% of the game's 80,365 reviews on the platform are positive. So 69%. So we've got what is that? 31% are negative, which is why it's this sort of mixed bag. But then, so with these negative reviews that Starfield has gotten, and maybe with an idea to sort of trying to fix some of these, the Starfield support team have decided that one of the best ways to do this is to individually go through reviews and address individual points that people are making to try and maybe to change how they feel about a certain aspect of the game that they felt was negative. So, for example, in response to one user calling Starfield's story generic and the gameplay boring, Bethesda customer support have replied to say that they've basically replied highlighting everything players can experience in the game, possibly to prove that the game is not boring nor generic. They've said you can fly, you can shoot, you can mine, you can loot. Starfield is an RPG with hundreds of hours of quests to complete and characters to meet. Most quests will also vary on your character's skills and decisions, massively changing the outcome of your playthrough. So the game is there objectively, Jamie, not boring nor generic. Then in another review, a user has commented that the loading screens are too long. There are too many of them, to which the support team have replied, consider the amount of data to the expansive gameplay that's procedurally generated to load flawlessly in under 3 seconds. Again, negating your opinion and your review. There's not too many. They did not take a long time. There's a lot going on there. Blimey, I can't talk in that 3 seconds. Also, in response to someone saying that that they have found Starfield's planets to be empty, the Bethesda team have said that by design the planets are empty, and that is not in fact boring. And they even, with this particular review, said when the astronauts went to the moon, they would have found it very empty, but definitely didn't find it boring. Because
goodness.
that is the nature of space travel and space exploration.
It's designed to evoke a feeling of smallness in players and make you feel overwhelmed.
Absolutely. But I love these. Like I'm gonna, which not I think I'm gonna do after we finish recording the podcast. I'm gonna go back to Twitter and just read some more of the comments that people have shared about the reviews. Okay, all right, let's get into it. I'm totally on board with Bethesda customer support doing this because A, it's hilarious and we get to read through them and laugh at them. B, they put so much time and effort, the company, obviously not the support people, into this game. And I'm sure that they've probably been told, like, go for it, you can respond. Like, maybe they wanted to before now and they've actually been given free rein to and they want to go and support the game. So I'm not mad at them. I'm kind of like, yeah, fine. As long as you're not deleting reviews and telling people and like banning stuff and hiding it. Is there anything wrong with commenting on negative reviews?
Is there anything wrong with it? No. And it is, you're right, in the grand scheme of things, pretty harmless. I still just think though it's a bad look. Like when you and I were chatting about this before the podcast went live, we were talking about how, oftentimes with online reviews, especially on Google reviews and stuff like that, you'll find like a local takeaway restaurant that has 2.5 stars on average, and the owner of the restaurant has clearly personally responded to every single review. And it's interesting. If you left the review saying I had a bad meal at this restaurant, the owner would reply saying, "I'm sorry you had a bad meal. The kitchen was really busy. We were overwhelmed. Things were slow. We made some mistakes. Please come back and give us another shot." The owner wouldn't reply saying, "You're mistaken. Your food was delicious. You just ate it wrong." So that there is something about the way that these things are written. Like, again, like we know that the way Steam reviews work is that these reviews are based on legitimate customers, people who have bought the game. The amount of time they've invested into this game will also be public. We don't have those numbers in front of us. But if someone came away from a game that 31% of people left a negative review for and said that they found some component of it generic or boring, you can't reply telling them that they're wrong and then list all the things you can do. Like, that's their opinion. And so there's something about the way that this has been written. It's you could argue that it's trying to get them to rethink the way that they played the game, the way they approached the game, or to try and encourage them to go back in with a different angle of approach. But a lot of them are kind of written in a no, actually you're wrong kind of way. Actually, empty planets aren't boring. They sorry, let me find it. Evoke a feeling of smallness and make you feel overwhelmed, so you can continue to explore and find worlds that do have the resources you need or hidden outposts to look through. Like, don't justify the things that people don't like about it. And if you don't have anything positive to say, then don't say anything, which is what 99.99999% of AAA publishers have been doing for the entire history of time. If you didn't like The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and you left a 5-star review saying big Hunger Games fan, bit disappointed in this one because even at 2.5 hours, which is a pretty hefty runtime, it felt like things were too condensed and there was a lot of information that was missing and not adequately provided or covered and whatever. And you got a response from an official representative of Lionsgate Films, and they said, actually, we crammed that much story into 2.5 hours to ensure the pacing was on point and to make sure that the film was riveting and exciting from beginning to end. You'd be like, what the fuck are you talking
I would
to?
say, thank you for correcting my view. I will immediately change my 5-star review to 8.5. No, you of course, yeah,
You know
no.
what I mean? You know what I mean? It's like,
Oh
not
no, I
only is it a
agree.
weird look, and does it almost feel below Bethesda
It is
to do
weird.
this on an individual level, but also just the way they're written isn't
It
great.
it is weird, although I think maybe one of the reasons I maybe give them a bit of a pass is because there are a lot of industries that do feel like they have a right to reply when it comes to criticisms or review, and
Yeah, the restaurant industry,
yeah,
but not the games industry.
the restaurant industry is absolutely one. However, I see. We're saying like if someone had a meal at a restaurant and they said my meal wasn't very nice, and the restaurateur said no, you're wrong. Your meal was succulent and juicy, and you should have really enjoyed it.
You ate it. You ate it. You ate it wrong.
That I know people that would go to a restaurant, eat the entire meal, lick the plate, and then would complain that they didn't like one aspect of it, and then would be like, it was too hot. You could be like, dude, maybe you ate it too quick. Maybe you should have had another drink, and you should have not eaten it when it was scalding hot.
That's not the case here, Jonesy.
No, it's not. But there are for sure some criticisms which I'm sure they read as like because games are weird, because when it comes to say something like was a game, and we always come back to this often, was a game worth the money? And it's like, if you had a 30-hour game that had a lot of original content, it had a lot of like voice acting and story, blah 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 blah, and you enjoyed it for 30 hours, but then between 30 hours and 100 hours you were a bit annoyed because it was a bit dull and there wasn't much going on, should you still give them the same level of criticism as you would say give an 8-hour COD game which had a really good story but nothing to do after that fact? We look at games very, very differently, but we all just call them games. So I can imagine that's where some of it is coming from, possibly. Like, for example, to say Starfield is boring, I would say, okay, I do have some sympathy for Bethesda if they're saying even if you don't like this aspect, there are hours and hours and hours of other things to do in this game and enjoy, and maybe get annoyed at boring. But then I'm completely on board with what you're saying when it's like, you can't tell a person who didn't like a meal, they said, oh, I didn't like this of the meal, to go, no, you should have done. Because that is weird. And that's why I'm like, half of me thinks, yeah, I get it. You worked on this game for 8 years. You spent millions and millions of pounds, hundreds or thousands of people worked on it. And you probably annoyed that someone called it boring. So I kind of get it from that aspect, but at the same time, I'm also from the other perspective. I'm like, you can't tell someone they did enjoy it when they didn't. And you also can't tell me that Starfield is a flawless game, because I've played the whole thing and there is a lot of flaws and there's a lot of things I would critique about it. I enjoyed it. I completed it. I thought it was good. I would give it a 70. I don't even know what I said before. I'd give it a 76.
Wow, same as Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora.
But were there boring aspects? Yes. Were some of the planets dull and to go to? Yes. Were some of the caves reused from other places and they were just repeats? Yes. Were, it's tricky. But then at the same time, I love that they've done this because we can talk about it and it's hilarious. And to read what they've written is kind of adorable.
It's definitely hilarious. It's definitely adorable.
They're also
There's
being kind,
also
to be
something.
fair. They're not telling people they're stupid. They're not insulting people. They are just saying,
Yeah,
kind of, with respect, you're wrong.
they're also saying it to people who have already bought the game, which is
Yes.
also like a really interesting kind of way of going about this. Like convincing people whose money they have already got that they had a better time than they did.
But would you want to argue with
So
those Muppets that don't even play games and then just leave a review?
no, I just think it's interesting that you could be doing a lot to try and convert people to trying to play the game. It's interesting to have to appeal to the good nature of someone who you can't get any more money out of.
Right.
And again, it's not like a restaurant or a fucking theme park where like you want them to come back.
But you do.
Really,
You do want them to
there's
come
no
back.
different. There's until DLC comes into the equation. There's no different between the Starfield consumer who played it once and the Starfield consumer who played it 1,000 times.
No, but
On
when I say
Steam,
come
they
back,
both paid the same amount of money.
I mean come back to Xbox, come back to Bethesda. Like do you know what I mean? If they genuinely can turn,
A customer support response doesn't do that, and
I
they know
would
that as
agree.
well as we do.
Okay, what about the idea that maybe they're doing it for the person, not for the person who wrote the review, but actually makes much more sense. They're doing it so that when someone reads that negative review, thinking about whether or not to buy the game, they can then read the response and go, oh, maybe this review is wrong.
That is a fair response, and I think going back ironically to restaurant reviews, I think that is why a lot of reviews get responded to, is because having a public response where either A, take responsibility, or B, make it clear why something was allowed to happen. Um, I actually think that's not a. But then
That is it, isn't it? That is why they're doing it.
negative Steam reviews are a part and parcel, and people can still see that there are tens of thousands of them that exist.
But then I suppose if I didn't already have the game, if I was on Steam and I was like, oh, let me check, maybe I should check out Starfield, and then I read this game's boring, it's generic, and then I read, hold on, someone's written a lovely poem that says you can fly, you can shoot, you can mine, you can loot. Starfield's an RPG with hundreds of hours of quests to complete and characters to meet. Maybe I would say lyricism
I would,
on
I
point.
would, I would say that someone on minimum wage has copied and pasted words that should have been on the back of the box.
Maybe. So someone in chat said, I wonder how many of these reviews were from ChatGPT.
Honestly, maybe.
I think
Maybe that
so.
was all this was, an experiment for an AI-driven customer response bot, and they were just testing it in the wild.
Now that we've said it, I'm like, I think that is the exact reason they've done it is because they're hoping that that prospective buyers looking at negative reviews are going to almost, like, let's say they've got the negative and then they've got the positive, or no, you're wrong because of this. They're hoping that some people would choose to click buy on Starfield, because they'll be like, this person says the planets are boring, but then the response is there's a quadrillion planets, and you go, oh, okay. If there's a quadrillion planets and some are boring, that means some are probably not boring. I'll still buy it. That's got to be it. That's got to be it.
I think they're kidding themselves if they think that these would have anywhere near that amount of sway with anyone. But maybe I'm wrong.
It would be interesting to see if you could sort of see analytics to see if there was any uptick in Starfield being bought on Steam at the time they started doing this, because yeah, it is weird. It is weird though, isn't it?
Jonesy, the line you said earlier about like when they wrote about when the astronauts landed on the moon, there was nothing there, and they certainly weren't bored. Like
That is awful, isn't it?
that's active. That's horrible from a PR perspective. Like
It's horrible.
who signed that off?
Also, like, astronauts who train their entire lives for this single moment to stand on the moon and look back at the Earth and, like, in awe, is not quite the same as some kid sat in his bedroom on his computer, like, who steps on a planet hoping there's something to do, and there's not.
And a customer service representative using it as justification for an empty, procedurally generated planet.
Yeah. Also, that is the snarkiest one I think I've seen so far, is the moon one, because that is, or whilst they're not
They
being
certainly weren't bored.
exactly, because then it's almost like saying they weren't bored. There must be something wrong with you. It kind of has that feel about it. Be like, yeah, but mate, I'm not on the moon, am I? I'm standing on a desolate spheroid in your computer game with nothing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's tricky, man. It's also, I bet you, I would bet that the more legitimate, I mean, I'm not being very fair by saying this, but the more legitimate criticisms that actually deal with some of like my biggest frustrations about Starfield, I bet aren't addressed because
Yeah.
they're more to go with game mechanics, like flow, pacing, things that aren't quite right with that sort of thing. I wonder if they would actually address those sorts of issues, or are they just going after low hanging fruit like, oh, Neil Armstrong had a good time on the moon.
Why aren't you?
Yeah, you can fly in
Yeah, I
our
don't know. I
game.
don't know.
What are you on about?
I think the best protocols here, the best way to proceed is no one ever do this ever again.
No, please do. It gave us something to talk about, and it was fun. So there we go. Um, Starfield is. If there was an award at the Game Awards for most frustrating game of the year, I think Starfield would probably take it from me.
Most frustrating.
Frustrating because I genuinely really enjoyed some aspects of that game and thought they were fantastic. Like the writing, the sci-fi, like threads that they wove were great. But then sometimes they just wouldn't go anywhere, or sometimes they just weren't enough of the finished product. So,
Okay.
like as an example, like one of the things I would love to get a response on Steam. There's a part of that game where you hop onto a ship which has got someone kind of like the Collector from Marvel, Benicio del Toro's character, and he's got a whole bunch of stuff collected from all over from Earth and from all other places, and he has all this really cool stuff, and you arrive there and you think, okay, I'm going to be able to go about this mission in a number of different ways. I need to get this artifact from him. How do I go about it? You end up, the way I did it, you end up talking your way into the room where the artifact is. If you're like me, you've already explored the ship and are already figuring out, oh, okay, there's different ways for me to do this and to get out without getting caught and to take this thing. And then it's like they dump all of that. They dump all the setup. They dump all of the pretense, and they basically say, you have to shoot your way out. And you think, well, why are there all these little hidey holes? Why are there these walls that I can blow through, I can cut through to sneak out? Why are there like characters here that it feels like I can have influence on to do this in a different way? It feels like they ran out of time in a lot
I
of
would say
aspects of
maybe
this
they
game.
did, but when you consider how long that game was in development for and how many delays it had, but then I would also fully believe that they did run out of time in some components. I also agree that that's not the kind of criticism that would be able to that you get a response from a customer support team on.
Yeah. Did your dev team run
Is
out
it,
of time in construction of this mission, which meant that it didn't fully meet the expectations that I had going into it? They'd just be like, you can fly, you can shoot, you can mine, you can loot. And I'll be like, cheers, mate.
if you repeat it often enough, then all your problems will go away.
Yeah.
Interesting that it's your most frustrating game. Like, frustrating is just not the adjective that comes to mind for me with Starfield for some reason.
Frustrating because
But
I think
then I never had that experience you just described.
but like
Necessarily.
frustrating in the sense of I don't think it was far off being fantastic. So that's what I mean by frustrating. Not the game itself necessarily, but I felt like it was close to
That
being
makes sense.
very, very good. But in the end, it only ended up being good.
See, that's probably where, yeah, that probably makes sense and tracked because I think the reason I don't think Starfield's frustrating is because I don't think it was that good. Sorry, I don't think it was that close to being phenomenal. I think it was good. I don't think it was close to being on the next tier up.
I was
Personally.
I was talking to Chris about it when we were when we met up because he said he's a big Bethesda guy, and he said that he's not that bothered about spoilers, and he straight up asked me what the big kind of reveal thing is at the end that people were saying, oh, don't
The reason some people were like desperate to do a new game plus and stuff like that.
yeah, and we talked about it, and I sort of explained to him what it was and how it worked, and he said that sounds awesome, and I said yeah, it's a fantastic idea for a new game plus and the way that it works, and I said, but you know what, I haven't gone back and played it. Which is a shame because I feel like if they'd have implemented it in a better way, I think I would have done, and I think I would have had more fun with the game.
I'm going to get you to tell me it after this podcast.
I think you know already. Do you not know? Maybe you don't. I think we've already talked about it. Maybe we haven't. Anyway, I don't want to spoil
We
it.
talked about like one element of Starfield that I guess is probably still a spoiler, but you gets revealed to you far earlier on than the end of the game.
Right. Okay. Yeah. But and yes, this is the thing. It's surprising to me that someone like Chris, who loves Bethesda games and is totally into, like, he loved Fallout 4 and which I fell off a hell of a lot quicker than he did. He had a great time with it. Yeah, but for him to be like, do you know what? I don't even want to finish it. Tell me how it finished. Tell me how it ends. I was like, okay. Although he maybe he just means he's not that bothered about spoilers and that he wanted, he was happy to know, but he's still going to finish it. But hey ho. You could always go and ask a Bethesda customer support how it ends, because I'm sure they would tell you in rhyme.
Actually, I kind of like the sound of
that. Anyway, with that is the end of this week's Super Show podcast. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Jamie, for, as always, your worldly insights and your expansive knowledge across multiple areas, not just gaming.
No, thank you for being such a generous and humble and diligent host.
Thank you also to everyone who has joined us in chat. Thank you for everyone who chats after this has gone out. Drop us a like, drop us a review if you're on a podcast platform, and you can do that. I'm not suggesting that you have to give us 5 stars if it's 5 out of 5. You can give us whatever you want, but we may pop up and critique your review with a review of our own of your review, Bethesda support style.
Oh, shit just got real. Do we have 5 stars at the moment? Our average on Spotify is indeed 5 stars. Thank you to everyone who voted 5 stars.
Love that. Thank you to everybody. Thank you, guys. We will see you again next week.